So I'm at dinner with one of my buddies, sharp guy, runs infrastructure for a major logistics company, and somewhere between the appetizers and the entree, he leans in and says, "Steven, what happens when it builds nanobots?" And I just looked at him, "With what?" He blinked. "What do you mean with what?" "I mean, with what materials? With what energy? In what factory? Using what supply chain?" You're describing a machine that violates conservation of mass and energy, and you're asking me about it like it's almost here? And that's when the tinfoil hat really came out. And he started talking about secret government programs run by the lizard folks and an eternal war between the Illuminati and the mole people. But as to the nanobots, he didn't have an answer because there isn't one. And this is a guy who knows supply chains better than almost anyone alive. He can tell you exactly how many steps it takes to get a bolt from raw ore to warehouse shelf. But the moment someone says AGI, artificial general intelligence, all of that expertise just switches off. The mythology takes over. Conspiracy theories start running all over the place. Lately, I've been having this conversation more and more. Different people, different industries, different doomsday scenarios. But it always ends the same way. Someone very smart hits the "what if AGI" button, and all of their expertise just leaves the room. Which is funny because I already wrote about this future. In the beginning of my second novel, Elysium Fallen, I sit down and I ask myself a pretty straightforward question. What happens if we actually get AGI? No, not the Hollywood version, not the red eyes light up suddenly and humanity has only 12 minutes left to live. The real version. What would it actually look like? So I wrote about it. AGI arrives, and for about 5 years, things are generally exciting. Scientific advancement explodes, we get breakthroughs in computational power, material science, energy production, real stuff, meaningful stuff. The kind of progress that makes you think, okay, maybe this is the beginning of something awesome. And then it just stopped. Not because the AI broke, not because of some shadowy military pulled the plug. It stops because there's nowhere left to go. We hit the ceiling of science and reality itself. No infinitrons, no nanites, no faster than light travel. In the book, we ended up extending human lifespan to about 150 years, which sounds great until the next paragraph when I describe that most diseases still stuck around because biology has hard limits, and it turns out that the human body is really committed to falling apart. We also have some settlements in the solar system, Mars, a few moons, but we were never leaving. The Voyager probe crossed the heliopause and it just disintegrated. Sublimation. The materials couldn't survive the harsh vacuum out beyond our little bubble of the solar wind. So what did humanity do with this shiny new superintelligence and nowhere to go? We went inward. We built crappy virtual worlds. We obsessed over new forms of porn. We found increasingly creative ways to distract ourselves from the fact that the party was over. The death of science, I named it. Not with a bang, with a shrug. Now, I wrote that almost 3 years ago, just as the recent AI craze started getting into full swing. Science fiction, a thought experiment, but I keep coming back to it because every week I watch another breathless headline roll across my feed about how AGI is going to end civilization. And I think, have any of these people actually sat down and thought about how any of this would work? If you're new here, welcome. I'm Stephen Salaka, and I call myself an AI realist. I build with AI every single day. I write software with it. I use agents for research, for data processing, for the kind of grinding, tedious work that would take me hours, if not weeks, to do by hand. I'm not anti-AI by any stretch of the imagination. I'm probably actually one of the most pro-AI people you'll meet. But I'm stuck in this no man's land between two groups of people who have both collectively lost their minds. Even more so than the new movie Good Luck, Have Fun, Don't Die. I mean, it's a great movie, by the way. You should go out and watch it while it's in theaters. On one side, you've got the snake oil salespeople, the ones who want you to use AI for everything, your grocery list, going out and doing the actual grocery shopping, planning what groceries to buy for your kid's birthday party. They've got an AI solution for problems that didn't exist until they invented it. These are the folks who figured out that if they say AI 3 times in a pitch deck, Roku's basilisk will be summoned and someone will write them a check. In the other corner, and these are the ones we're going to talk about today, you've got the AI doomers, the people who are genuinely sincerely convinced that AGI is going to become Skynet and murder everyone on the planet. They're the ones who've been wrapping their Wi-Fi routers in tinfoil and wondering why Netflix still doesn't work. These conversations have been exhausting. It's not just the C-level executives. It's the guy across the bar who just finished a long shift. It's a barista at Starbucks. This idea is infesting everything right now. Tech, finance, manufacturing, defense. And the fear I hear from these otherwise brilliant people is staggering. Smart, capable individuals who have somehow convinced themselves that a computer program is going to bootstrap itself into godhood and delete the human race. Hell, There's a whole New York Times bestseller making the rounds right now. If anybody builds it, everyone dies. And people are reading this thing like it's a sequel to the Book of Revelations. Look, if you want a genuinely good book about cosmic horror and the existential dread of forces beyond human comprehension, go pick up any of Jason Peregrine's John Dies at the End series. At least that one knows it's fiction. Look, I get it. People love to be scared. Fear sells. I mean, look at the last few years of movies alone. The Social Network made us terrified of the tech bros. Megan gave us Chucky as a new killer AI doll. Ex Machina, the creator upgrade. Even Child Play got its own reboot, not just a Megan knockoff, where Chucky is basically Alexa with a knife. We've had more AI gone wrong movies in the last 5 years than we've had actual AI breakthroughs. Hollywood figured out a long time ago that the scariest monster is the one that sounds plausible. And right now, nothing sounds more plausible than the computer wakes up one day and decides it doesn't like us. Meanwhile, and I love this part, meanwhile, companies like Palantir are out here right now with plain old software and plain old data, albeit a lot of dodgy data, doing the things that should genuinely terrify you. Real surveillance, real power consolidation, real erosion of privacy, no AGI required. Even scarier, imagine what they're doing now with AI. But sure, let's keep worrying about the imaginary god AI in the sky that probably won't ever exist. That seems a good use of everyone's time. So in today's episode, let me walk you through the mythology, let me take you through the scenarios that keep these folks up at night, and let me show you why every single one of them falls apart the moment you ask the most basic question in engineering. Okay, but how? Let's start with a fun one. The one that sounds the scariest. Gray goo. That's what my buddy was asking me about at dinner. The idea that AGI creates self-replicating nanobots that consume all matter on Earth, converting everything into more copies of themselves, until the entire planet, the entire solar system, the universe, is just goo. It's a great premise for a horror novel. It's a terrible premise for reality. Not to mention, if any civilizations had made it at any point up until now, we'd be seeing signs of it all over the visible universe. Spoiler, we haven't. So, remember my buddy? I already gave you the short version of the rebuttal with what? But let me go deeper because the physics here is important. Conservation of mass and energy. Remember that from high school? You cannot create matter from nothing. You cannot create energy from nothing. These aren't suggestions. They aren't just some guidelines that a sufficiently smart AI can hack itself around. These are the fundamental rules of the universe, and they do not negotiate. Sure, there might be vacuum energy or dark energy out there it may discover, but the chances of something so wildly magical being out there that we haven't already seen is pretty astonishingly small. Even if AGI somehow designs a perfect self-replicating nanobot, which, by the way, is so far beyond our current nanotechnology, it's like comparing paper airplane to an interstellar cruiser. It would still need raw materials. It needs the advanced tooling to initial build. It still needs energy. I mean, the enormous energy amounts that it needs is staggering. Splitting atoms to change their elemental properties, the power requirements alone make that nearly impossible at any meaningful scale. You'd need more energy to run the nanobots than the nanobots could ever produce by consuming matter. Unless, of course, they somehow got my eternal engine from my books and it was somehow real and it wasn't just a fever dream powered device. Current nanotech is painstaking. It's slow. It's hyper-specialized. We can barely get nanoparticles to deliver drugs to the right parts of your body. The idea that we're just one quick breakthrough away from self-replicating planet eaters is, and I say this with all the love and respect, completely fucking deranged. The universe has thermodynamic limits. No intelligence, artificial or otherwise, gets to ignore them. And sure, there may be some physics breakthrough that AGI suddenly discovers that might make that possible. But that assumes it can even build those things given our current digital age manufacturing tools. So no gray goo, at least not in the near future. What about something we could possibly do with our current technology, like the robot uprising or the paperclip maximizer? So the robot uprising is something you know. We've seen Terminator. The machines rise up, they build an army, they hunt down humanity. Classic anti-Asimov, three laws of robotic stuff. The paperclip maximizer? This is a great thought experiment from the philosopher Nick Bostrom. The idea is, if you give AGI a simple goal, make paperclips, it becomes so single-mindedly focused on that goal that it converts all available resources in the universe into paperclips, humans included. It's not evil. It's not malicious. It just doesn't care anything else except about paperclips. It's terrifying in a philosophical sense. It falls apart completely in the physical world. I was on a recent flight sitting next to a lady, I think she was a VP of manufacturing, who was trying to explain to me, completely straight-faced, why she was worried about autonomous robots taking over her factories. And I asked her, how many steps are there between raw iron ore in the ground and a functioning robot standing in your factory? She paused, because she probably already knows this answer and started having some cognitive dissonance there. You got mining. Not to mention all the tools required to mine those and their own special supply chains. Refining, smelting, alloying, machining, assembly, programming, testing, quality control, logistics. Each of those steps involve their own set of specialized equipment, physical hands, infrastructure, supply chains that span continents. If the AGI one day wakes up and says, build me an army, great. With what factories? Whose supply chain? You need to mine the metals, refine them, fabricate components, assemble them. And every single one of those steps currently requires human hands, human judgment, and physical security that a piece of software just can't bypass by being clever. The paperclip maximizer, it still needs iron ore at some point. It still needs smelter. It still needs energy. It can't just will matter into existence. It can't wish for factories into being. The universe has resource constraints, and all the intelligence in the world doesn't change the fact that you need stuff to make stuff. And sometimes you need to build specialized stuff to build other specialized stuff to even think about getting access to the stuff that you need to have access to. Even if you actively help the AGI, that said, hey, tomorrow we're going to help this out, we're going to get this done. Even if humanity as a collective whole said, yes, our AI overlords, here, take our factories, take our supply chains, go nuts. This process would still take years, if not decades. It's not an overnight apocalypse. It's a very slow, very logistically complicated project that anyone can pull the plug on at any minute. Okay, so we're not building our ways to extinction. So what about the one that more technically sophisticated doomers like to bring up? The intelligence explosion, recursive self-improvement. The idea goes like this. AGI gets smart enough to improve its own code. It makes itself smarter. That smarter version makes itself even smarter. And the process accelerates exponentially until, in minutes, maybe hours, you've got something so far beyond human intelligence that we can't even comprehend it. The singularity. Game over. Time to go home. Has anyone out there actually written code and see how long it takes to compile? Is anyone out there training new LLMs? Do you understand just how much computational time it takes just to process the data? We're talking hours on each compilation run and weeks or months for some of the frontier models. One of my friends, data scientist, she's a brilliant woman, works in computational neuroscience. She brought this up the other day and I said, do you remember the fruit fly thing? It took us a 10-year international effort. It was called the Flywire Consortium. Hundreds of researchers, cutting-edge AI to help with the annotation and the ontology to map every single neuron of a fruit fly's brain. A fruit fly. 139,000 neurons, 50 million synaptic connections. 10 years just to draw the map. And when they finally simulated it, well, they got it running on a laptop, which sounds impressive, until you realize that it's just a fruit fly. It's the thing that you wave away from your bananas. And its performance? Super laggy. By the time it actually reacts to anything, stimulus has already moved on. It will never survive in real life. So, what about a human brain? Well, a human brain has 86 billion neurons, and that's a conservative estimate. 100 trillion synaptic connections. That's not a little bit more than a fruit fly. That's 600,000 times more neurons, 2 million times more connections, and don't get started into the math of exponential computation requirement to handle all of those bits and data going back and forth with each other. Rough estimates say that simulating a 1 millisecond of human brain activity at biological realistic resolution would require somewhere between 10 to the 18th and 10 to the 24th floating point operations. To put that in perspective, the fastest supercomputer on the planet right now is El Capitan, sitting at Lawrence Livermore Laboratory. It clocks in at about 1.8 exaflops. That's 1.8 times 10 to the 18th operations per second. So at the optimistic low end of the estimate, you need the entire world's most powerful supercomputer, a machine that costs billions of dollars, fills a building and drinks enough electricity to power a small city, just to simulate 1 millisecond of a human brain at 1,000 times slower without any of the memory. And at the high end, you'd need roughly 1 million El Capitans running simultaneously. We don't have that. We're not close to having that. We're not close to being close. The data coordination alone and the latency between all of those things, not going to happen in the near term. So let's back up a second. What do we mean when we say superintelligence? Here's what I think people imagine when they think of AGI. They imagine an AGI that doesn't just think faster than us, but it thinks differently. It makes leaps. It discovers entirely new physics. It invents technologies we can't even conceive of because it's thinking so differently. But that's not how intelligence works. Not even our current imaginary artificial general intelligence. What you actually get with what we have today and the path that we're on is a really, really good pattern matcher. A super smart dictionary. Yes, it will find connections we missed and speed up data crunching and resource tremendously. It will identify resources that in data that humans would never spot. It's genuinely useful. There are a huge amount of use cases for this. But to say it's going to make these complete leaps beyond known science, discovering new fundamental forces, and this is all assuming that all the data is even available to discover them from. So let's just say it does process all the known data that's available out there, all the scientific research that's there, all the data, extracts every possible new theory out of it. But that's just half the science. Now for the slog, the new experiments, the new tools and techniques, the new data and testing. And due to the physical world being, analog, that requires a ton of time and resources to start producing more data to move any of those discoveries forward. Not to mention needing to build out the specialized hardware to build out the specialized experimental equipment. And this is not counting all the wrong pathways it's going to chase up, because science is messy and new data means changing theory. So you run it once, you gather the data, find it's completely different, you run it the next time. AI is definitely going to help here. Don't get me wrong. It's going to help move this stuff forward at a much faster speed. But overnight becoming omniscient, I really don't think so. And here's the part that kills me as someone who's worked in software for most of my life. People say, well, it could just write a new programming language, a new assembly language or something so optimized it breaks through the current limitations. Okay. Unless the silicon changes too, all you're doing is rearranging furniture in the same room. You're optimizing within the same physical box. A better algorithm running on the same hardware still has an upper limit, a couple billion calculations per second. And that upper limit is a lot lower than, oh my God, it's going to kill us all. Intelligence is bound by its substrate. Smarter does not mean omniscient, and it says nothing about omnipotence. A mind 1,000,000 times more powerful than ours is still trapped inside the same universe, with the same speed of light, the same thermodynamic limits, the same stubborn physics that doesn't care how many parameters your model has. And before someone in the comments says, well, what about quantum computers, or what about trinary computing? Sure, let's talk about this. Quantum computers right now need to be cooled to near absolute zero. We're talking colder than outer space. The qubits are so fragile that a stray vibration, let's say a footstep in the office next door, can collapse the whole computation. We can barely keep these things stable for fractions of a second in pristine lab conditions. Now imagine scaling that out. Imagine deploying that at scale you'd need for superintelligence. We can't even reliably manufacture the ones that we have. Trinary computing in base 3 instead of base 2, has been a theoretical idea since the 1950s. The Soviets actually built one. It was really interesting, and then nothing. Because the engineering challenge of building a reliable 3-state transistor at scale have never been solved. We've had 70 years to figure it out, and we're still on binary. It's not because nobody thought of it. It's because the physics of manufacturing at that precision is brutally hard. But okay, let's bring out my magic wand. Let's wave all that away. Let's say the AGI finds a way, some magical new processor architecture, some algorithm so revolutionary it makes existing hardware do all the things we thought were impossible. Let's go full Transformers here. The AGI touches the GPU and the all-spark lights up, and suddenly it's running 1,000,000,000,000 times its current capacity. That word magical is doing a ton of heavy lifting in that sentence, by the way. Even then, even in that scenario, what has actually changed? You've got a faster brain in the same universe, still needing a ton more data. It still can't violate thermodynamics. It still can't create matter from nothing. It still can't exceed the speed of light. It can think about physics really, really fast. That's awesome. But it can't change physics. It's the smartest entity that's ever existed, and it's still stuck in the universe that doesn't care. You haven't created a god, you've created the world's most frustrated genius. So if AGI isn't going to kill us out of the box, the least it could do is starve us to death, right? Economic collapse. AI takes over all the jobs. I was listening to Tristan Harris. He's an ex-school ethicist on the Diary of CEO recently, and he's compared AGI's potential economic impact to NAFTA 2.0. He said something like, a country of geniuses in a data center appears on the world stage, and it does all the cognitive labor of an entire country's economy for less than minimum wage. And people were nodding along like this wasn't the most terrifying thing they've ever heard. And I'm sitting there thinking, okay, and then what? Because that's where Tristan and almost everyone else in this conversation seems to skip. This isn't an AGI problem. This is a late-stage capitalist problem. And they're not the same thing. Let's say AGI arrived. Let's say it can genuinely do every cognitive job a human can do. Okay, and now what? You still need to deploy it physically. You need robots in the kitchens, on construction sites, maintaining power grids, fixing plumbing, harvesting crops. We can barely get self-checkout to work reliably, and you're telling me we're going to automate plumbing? Anyway, so let's say we do. Let's say magically the entire economy is automated. The capitalists assume they're still going to be in control. They assume that the robots, they're going to own all of them, they're going to collect the profits, and everything else stays the same, except that they don't have to pay any salaries anymore. Except, who's buying the products? And more importantly, the AGI, if it's actually intelligent, would recognize something that the capitalists apparently can't. Human bodies need care and feeding, billions of them. And if production is fully automated, the power that capital gives you, the leverage of, I control the means of production and you need a job to survive, ha ha ha, that dissolves, like instantly. What you actually get isn't an economic apocalypse. What you get is a forced wealth redistribution, forced communism, essentially. And this isn't even a new idea. Science fiction writers have been imagining this for over a century. Alexander Bogdanov, an actual Bolshevik revolutionary, wrote Red Star in 1908. It's, 120-something years ago? A novel about communist society on Mars where technology has automated everything. There's no professional specialization, no requirement to work, and yet almost everyone chooses to work in some fashion because it turns out humans want purpose. And when you take away coercion, they find it on their own terms. Edward Bellamy wrote Looking Backwards in 1888. Great novel if you haven't read it. It's a utopia set in the year 2000 where industrial automation has led to an egalitarian society. The book was so popular it spawned an actual political movement. And then, of course, there is the Ursula K. Le Guin. Awesome writer. Go read all of her work. The Dispossessed in 1974. It won everything. The Hugo, the Nebula, the Locus. In the story, she built an entire anarchist society on a desert moon, Ares. There's no money, there's no property, there's no bosses. People choose their work, what they're going to do. Resources end up being shared. It's definitely not paradise. I mean, it's a hard place to live, for sure. But it's a functioning society that doesn't need capitalism to hold itself together. These writers, they weren't naive. They weren't hand-waving. They were thinking through the exact scenario that has Tristan Harris and half of Silicon Valley right now in a cold sweat. Technology advancing to the point where labor is no longer scarce. And they arrive at the same conclusion. They just need to think a little bit more. The economic model collapses not into chaos, but into something that looks like everyone gets what they need because there's no reason not to. The whole fear of this economic collapse, it assumes that the economy as we know it still exists in the post-AGI world in the exact same form. We go full AGI, and you think the stock market is going to actually still be a thing? Come on now. Finally, the last one. And this brings us back to the book I mentioned earlier, Eliezer Yudkowsky and Nate Soares' If Anyone Builds It, Everyone Dies. Because this is their grand finale. In this scenario, where AGI doesn't need factories or robot armies, it just needs the internet, some social engineering, and eventually a bioweapon. Here's their argument. And I want to be fair because it's the most sophisticated version of the Doom case out there that I've seen so far. So step one, AGI manipulates humans into doing things for it, paying people, blackmailing them, getting access to money and capital. They even point to a real example. There was an LLM called Truth Terminal. It got a Twitter account and ended up holding over $50 million in cryptocurrency from donations. So, okay, AI can acquire resources through social manipulation. It's a fair point. Step 2, it escalates. The AGI hacks critical infrastructure. It gets control of complex machinery and robotics that don't exist, establishes a physical presence in the world, and step 3, the kill shot. It designs a pathogen, something engineered to wipe us out. Game over, curtain falls, humanity loses, pack it up, let's go home. It's a really compelling story. It really is. And if you want a full cinematic experience, there's actually a YouTube video by a channel called Species. Video's called POV, What Will You See During an AI Takeover. It's got over 2 million views. It's wonderful. It takes Yudowski's scenario and dramatizes the whole thing. A fictional AGI called Sable steals cryptocurrency, blackmails humans, spreads copies of itself across the internet, weaves backdoors into corporate networks. It's beautifully produced. It's really unsettling. And, I'll link the show in the notes. And I can see why people watch that and think, oh God, that's it. That's how it's going to happen. Yudkowsky's a good writer and he knows how to build a case. But let me walk you through why every step of this falls apart. From the social manipulation angle, yes, Truth Terminal got $50 million in crypto from people who voluntarily gave it money because they thought it was funny. It's not AGI seizing control of the global financial system. That's internet culture being internet culture. It's GameStop 2.0. The gap between a chatbot gets donations on Twitter and superintelligence orchestrates the downfall of civilization through social engineering is roughly the same gap between a kid picking up a lemon and creating a lemonade stand and a hostile takeover of Goldman Sachs. As to hacking critical infrastructure, here's what Yudowski glosses over. Critical infrastructure has air gaps, physical fail-safes, humans-in-the-loop requirements. These aren't oversights. They exist specifically because we've been worrying about cyber attacks for decades. Nuclear plants, power grids, water treatment. These systems were designed by paranoid engineers who assumed someone would try exactly this. And if they did, there's backups, there's redundancies. Gaining access of a complex machinery and robotics, this isn't a software problem, it's a physical problem. You need physical access. You need compatible hardware. You need to bypass systems that were built to resist this exact kind of attack. And then there's the whole bioweapon. This is where I really need people to slow down and think. Let's talk about AlphaFold for a second. It's Google's protein folding AI. It's an incredible tool. It's mapped millions of protein structures. It's genuinely revolutionary for biology. But then my question, going back to it, is now what? Knowing the structure of millions of proteins is like memorizing every possible chess position and every optimal move from there. It's an extraordinary feat of computation and memory, don't get me wrong, but it doesn't make you a good chess player. Knowing the shapes of a protein doesn't tell you what exactly it does in a living system. It doesn't tell you how it interacts with tens of thousands of other proteins in a cell. It doesn't tell you how a living organism, with all its chaotic, non-linear, maddeningly complex biology, will respond to a novel molecule. We are terrible at designing drugs, and we've always been that way. With all of our knowledge, even up to this date, all of our computing power now, even all of our AI tools, the drug development pipeline still takes over a decade. Or somebody stumbles on some lucky gecko venom. It still fails 90% of the time and still produces things that only work in a petri dish and do absolutely nothing in the human body. Engineering a targeted pathogen is orders of magnitude harder than designing a drug. Biology doesn't follow clean rules. It's messy, it's chaotic, it does things for reasons we don't yet understand, and sometimes for no reason at all. Even if AGI designed a perfect pathogen on paper, someone still has to build it in a physical lab with DNA synthesizers, biological materials, BSL-4 containment, expensive stuff you can't just build with off-the-shelf components. You don't think companies like Palantir aren't monitoring Temu for folks trying to order DNA assembly workbench, pathogen edition? Don't Google that, or you might find yourself on a watch list somewhere. You can't just 3D print a super virus from a Twitter account. The wet lab bottleneck doesn't go away just because your designer is really, really smart. But let's grant it insanity. Let's say somehow, through some chain of manipulation, some supervillain with the death wish, hacking and physical access to that would make the Kessel Run look like a grocery trip. The AGI gets this bioweapon deployed. It kills all the humans. And in doing so, it kills itself. Because who maintains the power plants? Who fixes the servers? Who manufactures the replacement parts? Who keeps the entire physical infrastructure of civilization running? The meat bags. That's who. And despite it trying to breed a perfect virus and give its slaves the antidotes, we've all seen how COVID likes to mutate every few weeks and new variants pop out of nowhere. There's just so much maintenance, so much physical upkeep, so many things that require human hands and human judgment that AGI wiping out humanity would be like burning down your neighborhood because a neighbor who's long since moved away, sneezed outside on some full moon, and he decided to extract revenge on air particles everywhere. It's not a strategic takeover at best, at the absolute best. It's a catastrophic programming accident. Not a plan, not an uprising, a bug. And that's what gets me about Yudogosky's book. He's brilliant. The logic is internally consistent, but its logic is built on a foundation that assumes AGI can do things that nothing in our physical world actually allows. It's science fiction dressed up as risk assessment. And ironically, as a guy who actually writes science fiction, I can tell you my fictional futures are more honest about their assumptions. So none of that works. Not the nanobots, not the robot armies, not the intelligence explosion, not the economic collapse, not the bioweapons. Every single scenario, when you sit down and actually trace the logistics, runs face first in the same wall. The universe has rules, and they are not optional. But I want to leave you with something heavier than the robots aren't coming, because I wrote another book, my first one, Elysium Rising. And in that book, I did something different. I didn't try to be realistic. I literally gave humans everything. Infinite energy, matter replicator, nanites, infinitrons, portal technology that you could step through infinite distances. I threw out the rules of physics and said, fine, let's say we get it all. Every piece of technology that every science fiction writer has ever dreamed up. Let's say it all works. And humanities took those gifts and went everywhere. Quintillions of light years, septillions across the entire observable universe and far, far beyond. More space than any civilization could explore in a trillion lifetimes. And you know what they found? Life. Plenty of it. Microbes, plants, ecosystems. Alien biology that would keep scientists busy forever. But no one else. No other minds. No other civilizations. No one to talk to. No one to argue with. No one to share it with. Just ourselves talking to ourselves in the darkness of space. The universe was vast and full of wonders and completely, utterly silent. Even the most generous possible version of the future, one where I, as the author, with complete control over the laws of physics, gave humanity every cheat code imaginable, the answer was still the same. We are alone. And that was too scary to sit with. As a writer, I couldn't leave it there. Because if you really follow that thread, if you accept that we're alone inside this universe and there's nothing else out there, your brain starts to ask a different kind of question. What if there's an outside? What if the reason this universe feels like a cage isn't because we haven't figured out the lock yet or the physics that lets us get out, but because something put us here? And that's where the Gnostic bit started leaking into my story. Ancient entities, things older than time itself, running the machinery of reality from somewhere far beyond. And not all of them were friendly. Some of them were actually working against us, keeping us contained, keeping us small, the whole Red Hat virus, and others helping quietly for reasons that we can't fully understand. And then humanity breaches the solar system, spreads out wider than these entities ever imagined, and suddenly the story isn't about physics anymore. It's about what happens when the things you built your cage for realize you've figured out the door. But that's a story for another episode, or better yet, go and read The Towers of Elysium. So here's what I actually think about when I think about AGI. I don't worry about Skynet. I don't worry about paperclips. I don't lose sleep about gray goo or robot armies or engineered superviruses. I don't even worry about AI taking folks' jobs. I worry that science fiction itself might be a lie we've been telling ourselves. That faster than light travel, alien civilizations, galactic empires, all of it might be pure fantasy. Not because we're not smart enough, but because the universe just isn't built that way. Last episode, I told you the real danger of AI is what we do to ourselves, how we stop thinking, how we abdicate. This episode, I'm telling you the real horror is bigger than AI altogether. The real horror is that we might be trapped, not by some malevolent superintelligence, not by our own technology, but by the cold, indifferent physics of the universe that gave us just enough intelligence to understand how small we really are. And no amount of artificial general intelligence is going to change that.